Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. This is really, this has been a lot of fun for me to get to spend some time with my friends in the publishing industry. I should start by saying that I don't really have a specific agenda for what you should do in the publishing industry, although people have been asking me that all day and all day yesterday, too. I want to be super clear. I can only imagine how deluged you are with random outsiders from God knows what industry coming in and telling you what you should do. Publishing's so easy, just get over it. And so I'm really going to try not to do that as best I can today. Instead, what I wanted to do was share some of the ideas from my new book, The Lean Startup, and talk a little bit about my process of launching the book, which applied some of the ideas. Otherwise, I would have been a giant hypocrite. I just want to first encourage everybody, I don't want your undivided attention. So if anyone made the mistake of turning your device off, if you turn it back on, hold it in your hand and tweet amongst yourselves. You're welcome to use the Lean Startup hashtag so that you can join the worldwide conversation about these ideas that's taking place. I personally will be using it to check my Amazon rank as we go. It's 178 right now, so we'll see in an hour how you all did. I hope you like the talk. I want to tell you a little bit about my background. I live in San Francisco. I work in Silicon Valley with the high-tech startups that everybody knows about. And I was a software programmer my whole career. I thought I'd be writing code as long as I lived. And so this kind of detour into being an author, being an expert in this theory has been a little bit of a strange thing for me. And yet I believe that we have an opportunity together to make some very impactful change. I want to first just give you some context, though. I am actually a happy author. The publishing industry, the mainstream publishing industry, has been very good to me. My book was published by Crown Business, came out last September. During the pre-order campaign, it got as high as number 3 on Amazon, which I was very pleased. It was my own publisher, Random House, though, who gave George R.R. Martin 2 SKUs. Why does he need 2 SKUs? Why does he have to take over the whole thing? So I only got to number 3. Thanks, Random House. I appreciate that. And the book came out and debuted at number 2 on the New York Times list behind Joel Osteen. It's just not fair. Have you seen that guy's megachurch? I mean, like 7 million people watch his TV show. So anyway, but I'm a happy author. Things went well for me. And so although during the publishing process, I more than once thought to myself that it could potentially be a little bit more optimal, I'm not an author who has felt like I was betrayed by publishing. I want to share some of the ideas from the book, and here they are, that entrepreneurs are everywhere, that entrepreneurship is management, that the unit of progress of entrepreneurship is validated learning, that we can steer a startup using something called the build, measure, learn feedback loop, and last, we can hold entrepreneurs accountable using innovation accounting. And when I'm with startup people, I often have to apologize because this sounds a little bit boring, and entrepreneurship is supposed to be cool and exciting and sexy, and yet I actually believe that it's the boring stuff that determines the outcome of most startups, and therefore we're going to talk about management and accounting. Sorry about that. First, entrepreneurs are everywhere. It's really important, since very few people in this room, I'm guessing, have a business card that says entrepreneur on it. I want to start by talking about what is a startup and why are we talking about this at a publishing conference, for God's sake. So here it is, the definition of a startup: a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So it's not anything to do with that traditional image of the 2 guys in a garage, eating ramen noodles. It doesn't matter what kind of noodles you like. It doesn't matter if you live in a garage. All that matters is that you're trying to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And I believe that anybody who is publishing a new piece of media, a book, a movie, a TV show, except in the rare case of the sequel, if anyone here is publishing Harry Potter 10, you're probably fine. But for the rest of us, we are fundamentally engaged in entrepreneurship, which is a fancy way of saying that a startup is an experiment. But in the 20th century, a lot of our experiments had to do with, what can be built? Is this new crazy piece of technology, is it even possible to be built? And yet in software, this funny thing has happened that we now can build anything that we can imagine. And so the question of our time is not can it be built, but rather should it be built? Interestingly, that's always been the question in media. No one's ever pitched me, at least I can't think of a single book, an author. I get calls from authors now pretty often. No one ever pitches me a book and I say, can that book be written? Is it possible? Of course, it can be written. The question is, will anybody want to read it? And that challenge is not really unique to publishing. And the problems that are being caused in publishing, I don't see as particularly unique to publishing. I believe that they are basically management challenges. If you think about the 20th century general management that we still teach MBAs, it is very much about planning and forecasting. We all know that a book who does better than expected, a manager who's ahead of plan, a company whose Beating its forecast, stock price will go up, otherwise go down, or the manager or author be fired. And yet, if you think about that, planning and forecasting require a long and stable operating history from which to make the forecast. And show of hands for everyone who feels like the world that we live in is getting more and more stable every day. Right. So what we need is a new kind of management. I call it entrepreneurial management that is geared specifically to this condition of extreme uncertainty that we all find ourselves in. And probably the most important concept from the toolkit of entrepreneurial management has become a bit of overused business jargon, for which I apologize. It's called the pivot. I kid you not, this cartoon is from the actual New Yorker magazine. It says, "I'm not leaving you, I'm pivoting to another man." So, yeah. But what you have to understand about startups is that even though in the media it seems like the first idea is the one that won, actually if you get to the real stories, you'll notice this crazy zigzaggy path where entrepreneurs often start out with quite a bad idea, but they're able, when they run into difficulty, not to give up and go home, but neither also to persevere the plane straight into the ground. They can adjust, change their strategy while staying true to their vision. And unfortunately, the way that most books are launched, there's no opportunity to pivot. It is absolutely sink or swim. You either get everything right, the plan that you proposed 2 years ago is exactly right, or you're doomed. Does that sound like planning and forecasting gone crazy? I certainly felt it was. And the idea of the lean startup is that there are specific techniques we can do that will decrease the time between pivots so that we can increase our odds of success before it's too late. Now, the key here is this thing called validated learning. The purpose of entrepreneurship, if you believe what I've been saying about extreme uncertainty, is to discover how to build a sustainable business. And so in the case of a book, we want to know how can we make the book a success so that it's not random by the time it comes to the launch. And what we usually do is what I call achieving failure. Most of the books I know, most of the authors I talk to who are not happy authors, their publisher and they put together a very detailed marketing plan for the launch, and then they executed it perfectly. They did every single thing on that. They produced a high-quality book and really good, press release, and they got a bunch of media hits, and then nobody bought the book. So it's like they're driving a car off a cliff and bragging about the great gas mileage they're getting as it goes right over the cliff. So if we're building something that people don't want, why should we be proud of having done it on time and on budget? So when I was told that the expedited path for publishing my book would take 18 months, after I stopped laughing, what I thought about is, what am I going to do for those 18 months? And I thought, well, that's actually a great opportunity to try to figure out how to actually sell this book to actual people. So instead of working on the marketing plan, for example, the book came out last September. The September before, so a full 12 months before the book came out, I started taking pre-orders. And I don't want to give you some idea that's a very elaborate experiment. I want to show you exactly what it looked like. Here's the screenshot. Here is a written description of the book that will come out more than 1 year from now. And if you click OK, you will be taken to a PayPal page. I don't know if you can read this. It basically says, you will get this book sometime in the next year. You will pay me $30. Now, I didn't even know if $30 was the right price because, of course, we didn't know the page count, and you can't set a price for a book without the page count. So I just took people's money, and I just had a bank account accumulating orders more than a year in advance. And you can believe I had to pay actual people to go enter those orders into Amazon and other retailers. It was a gigantic pain in the neck. But the value was what I was able to learn in the process. So I guess because I come from software, I think that publishing has become the software business. And so the first thing I did after this experiment was successful is I actually built a website where I could start to experiment with different elements of the marketing plan for the book. So I built this website. You can actually see all the experiments I'm going to describe and the full data that we use to collect at lean.st. And the hardest part about getting this website built actually was getting the engineers in San Francisco to believe me when I told them how the publishing industry actually works. They often would be like, but wouldn't it be better if it worked this other way? I was like, yeah, that's true. But anyway, here's how it actually works. We are going to have people manually enter orders. And so I want you to think about the typical negotiation between an author and publisher, like, for example, for cover of book. I thought I'd bring some examples of covers of books. And I think about how this negotiation went. See, here's if it was a science textbook. I don't really understand the concept for this one. We went through a phase where my publisher was really into yellow, this particular color of yellow, and they kept telling me, nobody on the business shelf is using this yellow color. It will really pop. So they kept sending me cover after cover after cover in yellow. And I actually was traveling a lot, testing out the ideas in this book. And so I was often in airport bookstores, and I have a camera with me and my phone. So I started sending them photos of actual business bookshelves, because why are we speculating when we actually have the opportunity to get real information? Here's an actual business bookshelf. You can see there's quite a bit of yellow on it. I really enjoyed sending my editor this photo of the no yellow that is available on the business bookshelf right now. And then this is my favorite sequence of covers that was proposed. These are, I'm not making any of these up, I promise. Here's the Lean Startup. It was published in 1990. Here's one with a giant dog statue I've never really understood. And my all-time favorite, dog in space. Okay, now usually we argue about these things like, I think dog in space looks stupid, and someone else says, I think it looks great, although no one could actually explain to me why dog in space. This is actually a waste of time to argue subjectively about which cover looks better to me as a so-called expert. And certainly when we have authors, prima donna authors involved, what do they know? But for every one of these covers, we were able to test empirically on the website to discover how it affected people's decision to buy the book. And so we didn't have to worry about whose opinion was right when we had actual data that could suggest, hey, this cover, and believe me not, does not actually convert very well. The general version of this idea is what we call the build, measure, learn feedback loop. And this is the diagram from software. When we're a software company, what we do is transform ideas into products. And then when customers interact with those products, we collect data which can influence our next set of learning. And our goal is to get through this feedback loop as quickly as possible. Now, if you read the book, and I hope all of you will, and I will check that Amazon rank, and I'll know, because I'll have data, I won't have to speculate. There's a ton of specific techniques that have the effect of moving us through this feedback loop faster. And I want to just share one more that we use on the book. But remember that the goal here is not to get all focused on these specific techniques, but rather to discover for our project, for our startup, for us as entrepreneurs, what actually works in changing our customers' behavior. So book purchasing happens in two places, basically. It happens on Amazon.com, on that page that I just showed you, and it happens in physical bookstores. So the graphic designer I was working with on the cover, after we got through some of those really quite bad ones, just started photoshopping the book into actual shelves, which I have been taking pictures of from my cell phone. So here's the cover in orange. Here it is in red. Here it is in, I don't even know what this color is because it doesn't pop at all. And now take a look at what the actual cover does perceptually. Right, see how the blue cover pops much better? I know that empirically, not because it's just my opinion, but we use a site called 5-Second Test, where we would show people these images for 5 seconds, and then we would just ask them one simple question. Tell me some books that you saw on the bookshelf in the previous picture. And for covers that work, we could very easily see a quantifiable difference in their behavior. The thing I want to point out here is that at no point were we asking customers for their opinion, which is a gigantic waste of time, even as big a waste of time as asking authors for their opinion. In fact, I once had a conversation with someone in publishing who shall remain nameless, and I said, hypothetically speaking, I was thinking about who to sign with, if I were to bring some data about what covers converted best to our discussion about covers, would you be willing to look at the data? And I kid you not, the person said, what do you mean by customer? What does that word mean? And I was like, the person that buys the book. And they're like, you mean like the Barnes & Noble category buyer? I was like, no. And I was grappling in my mind, what is the word I'm looking for? Oh, right, the reader. The reader is what I mean. And they were like, what does that have to do with anything? And so then what are you going to do? Do a focus group of readers and ask them about covers? That doesn't make any sense. So I want to be really clear. This is about science. Science is only as good as your hypothesis. And as authors and publishers, our hypothesis is our vision for what the book could be. So I want us to take our focus away from product milestones of like, hey, we got the book into copy editing. Shouldn't we succeed? Well, shouldn't we celebrate? No point in celebrating a well-copy edited book that nobody reads. And instead focus on learning milestones, the most important of which is this concept of the minimum viable product. How do we start that process of learning and iteration with the smallest amount of work necessary to start collecting that real data? That, I think, is the power of Lean Startup Ideas. It's certainly what allowed me to collect on the order of 10,000 pre-orders before the book debuted, which is why when this book launched, I knew exactly how well it was going to do in its first weeks, and I'm gratified to say it's done well since then. Now, yesterday I was with, we had a roundtable discussion with a number of publishing executives where I got to discuss these ideas in some detail. It was quite an interesting experience, I'll tell you. A lot of people came up to me beforehand and said, I can't wait to see the fireworks. I was like, what do you mean? Then I found out what they meant. And a lot of people ask me, well, if you ran Random House or some other publisher, what would you do? And so I just want to tell you the answer I gave them so that you can think about whether this makes sense. Which is, if it was up to me, I would take a subset of the proposals that we currently get. I might take a category like business books and take all the rejected proposals, not the ones we're saying yes to, but the ones we say no to. Create a separate division with no more than 5 or 10 people, a few developers, a few editors, maybe somebody in marketing, and I would give them the mandate to find the diamonds in the rough in those rejects empirically. So we might create a community site where early readers could come and get access to early drafts of work for authors who, after all, the traditional process isn't working for anyway. And then we can measure how they actually respond to the work in question in order to predict which books are actually going to be good. I bet a book that has a higher than usual read-through rate, that is, people actually get to the end of the material you give them, will predict their success. And that subsidiary would have the mandate to only launch bestsellers. Instead of picking a date, launching, and see what happens, we only pick the launch date when we know we have a bestseller on our hands. So imagine that. A small subsidiary of a company today could be the future of your company if it could launch consistently bestsellers. It would be a more meritocratic way of finding the best voices and getting them to the right customers. In other words, it would be like publishing. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for your time. Please be in touch if I can ever be helpful. Thanks again. Thank you.